Usually when we talk about ancient religious texts, there's this default setting we all kind of just slip into.
Oh, absolutely. The default mode.
Right. We treat them like, well, like magical incantations. You mindlessly recite the verses. You hope for some vague mystical blessings to just sort of rain down on your life.
And then you close the book.
Exactly. You close the book and you go right back to participating in the exact same broken, exploitative world you were living in like 5 minutes ago.
Yeah, it's a very comfortable cycle.
It is. But what if that entire approach is just a massive trap? I mean, what if while you're sitting there reading for blessings, those exact texts are actually screaming at you, demanding that you completely overhaul your socioeconomic reality?
It's a profound paradox, really. We take these instructions that were fundamentally designed to spark a civilizational revolution, and we basically weaponize them into a lullaby to keep ourselves asleep.
A lullaby. That is such a perfect way to put it. And waking you up from that lullaby is the exact mission for our deep dive today.
Right. We're bringing out the magnifying glass for this one.
We really are. We are taking a rationalist magnifying glass to a very specific, highly detailed lecture on Surah Al-Imran from the Quran. Specifically, we're looking at verses 38 through 51.
And this analysis comes directly from the rationalist school of Allama G. Parwez.
Right. And our goal here today is to completely shatter this naive misconception that these verses are just mere religious placeholders, or like magical fairy tales about a virgin, a baby, and some flying clay pigeons.
Because they're not, at all.
No. We're going to look at how this source material frames these verses as a hardcore, uncompromising civilizational blueprint.
A blueprint that, if it were actually implemented, threatens every single pillar of the modern status quo.
Which actually brings me to a very important point for you, the listener. We really need to be crystal clear up front about what we're doing here.
Yeah, a quick disclaimer is definitely needed.
Exactly. This deep dive contains highly revolutionary, fiercely anti-capitalist, and frankly, deeply anti-clerical interpretations. It challenges some of the most deeply held traditional orthodoxies out there.
Some very sensitive topics for a lot of people.
Right. But neither of us sitting at these microphones is taking a personal side today. I really want to stress that. We aren't endorsing a specific religious sect, and we certainly aren't pushing a political agenda on you.
No, not at all.
Our sole objective is to impartially unpack the fascinating systemic framework provided in this source material. Because honestly, the architecture of this argument is just incredibly intricate.
It really is. And to understand that architecture, we first have to grasp the central, unyielding conflict that runs through this entire source text.
The core battle.
Exactly. According to Parwez's analysis, the narrative in Surah Al-Imran isn't about good versus evil in some abstract spiritual sense. It's a ground-level clash between two highly specific, totally incompatible systems.
Okay, lay them out for us.
So on one side, you have what the text calls mazhab. Right. Now, in this framework, mazhab is defined as a human-engineered religion.
Human-engineered?
Yes. It is a system of static rituals, specifically designed by a self-appointed priesthood to subjugate the masses, control wealth, and maintain power.
I'm trying to think of the best way to visualize mazhab for someone who hears the word religion and just thinks of, just being a good person.
It's a totally different concept here.
It almost sounds like, like a cosmic subscription service.
Oh, I like that.
Right. Like the priests tell you that God is perpetually angry and the only way to appease him is to pay your dues, perform the very specific rituals they invented, and essentially buy a ticket to heaven.
And conveniently, they're the ones collecting the ticket.
Exactly. They are taking a massive cut of the transaction.
It's a highly accurate modern parallel. In mazhab, the priests act as the inescapable middlemen between humanity and the divine. You can't get to God without going through their toll booth.
Right.
But on the opposing side of this conflict, you have Deen. Yes. Deen is presented as the divine system. It is not a religion in the traditional sense. It's a dynamic, living framework of socioeconomic justice, scientific rationalism, and collective action.
So if mazhab is a subscription service to heaven, Deen is like a constitutional government for Earth.
Precisely. It dictates how resources are managed, how justice is administered, and how humans interact with one another without exploitation.
Okay, so as we walk through this history today, every single event, every word, is a battleground between the oppressive chains of mazhab and the liberating system of Deen.
Every single word.
And to really see what that battle looks like in practice, the source material argues that we have to look at how one of history's most famous women has been completely misunderstood.
We have to leave the abstract theory behind.
Right. We need to step into the brutal historical reality of the first-century Israelite temple. We are talking about Mary, or Miriam.
Now, when you consider the traditional Orthodox reverence for Mary across multiple faiths, it is almost entirely rooted in biological anomalies.
Like the virgin birth.
Exactly. The focus is always on this passive, quiet, utterly submissive maiden who experiences something supernatural.
The traditional view elevates her because of something that happened to her, something entirely out of her control.
Right, she's just a vessel in that narrative.
But Parwez analysis forcefully argues that this robs her of her actual human agency.
It completely erases it.
Yeah. In this rationalist framework, her true greatness, the real reason the text elevates her above all women of her era, lies in her unprecedented, incredibly dangerous ideological rebellion.
And we really need to set the scene based on the historical context provided in the text to understand what exactly she was rebelling against.
Paint the picture for us.
Well, Mary was not living in some peaceful, quiet sanctuary. She was a young girl who had been dedicated to the temple from childhood. She was trapped in an oppressive, patriarchal system of temple monasticism.
And there's a specific Arabic term for that, right?
Yes, Rabbaniyat. It means asceticism, celibacy, extreme isolation. She was essentially locked away in a system controlled entirely by an elite, politically connected clergy.
Let's talk about where she was actually locked away. Because this completely blew my mind when I read the source notes.
The linguistic breakdown is fascinating.
It's wild. So the text focuses heavily on the word mihrab. Now, if you are listening to this and you're familiar with a modern mosque, you probably picture a mihrab as that beautiful, ornate, arched prayer niche where the imam stands to lead the congregation.
Right, you think of gorgeous tile work, quiet, acoustic, peaceful.
Exactly. It's the most serene place in the building.
Yeah.
But the source material breaks down the linguistic root of this word in its ancient Israelite context, and it is honestly jarring.
The linguistic root of mihrab is harb.
Which translates to war or blood.
War, fighting, or the shedding of blood.
Wow.
So in the context of the ancient Jewish temple where Mary was placed, the mihrab was absolutely not a peaceful meditation corner.
What was it?
It was the temple slaughterhouse. It was the massive stone altar where the priests performed endless ritualistic animal sacrifices.
I really want you, the listener, to just pause and put yourself in that physical space for a second. Think about the sensory reality of that.
It's overwhelming.
The smell of copper and blood baking in the hot sun, the noise of terrified dying animals, the flies, the relentless industrial machinery of death.
And this is the epicenter of what the text calls mazhab, this exploitative, ritualistic religion.
It literally was an industrial complex, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The priests used these bloody rituals to maintain their monopoly on divine access. They demanded these sacrifices from the people, creating a system of spiritual and economic taxation.
So you bring your best livestock.
The priests sacrifice it, keep the best cuts of meat for themselves, and tell you God is satisfied.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
It's a massive wealth transfer mechanism disguised as piety.
Exactly. And it was within this brutal, hyper-masculine, politically corrupt environment that a young, highly intelligent girl named Mary is forced to live out her days.
She wasn't just meditating in a vacuum. She was watching this happen.
She was observing the ultimate corruption of the religious clerics up close every single day. She saw them enforcing their self-made sharia, their arbitrary laws, to exploit the vulnerable.
And the text gives us a brutal example of just how vulnerable she was, right? And how these priests viewed women essentially as commodities.
It's a very revealing moment in the narrative.
The Quranic narrative exposes a moment where the temple priests are literally fighting over who gets to keep Mary. They are casting lots.
Throwing dice or drawing straws, essentially, to determine legal custody of a human being.
A young girl. The source material points out that this specific verse is designed to strip away all that mythical holy reverence surrounding the ancient temple.
We are so conditioned to look at these priests as pious, holy men with long beards.
But the text exposes them as mobsters fighting over property. And the systemic takeaway here is just profound. The text argues this highlights the ultimate humiliation of women under man-made religious hierarchies. They are treated as assets on a ledger.
Which brings us to one of the most critical, permanent values established in this framework: the absolute inviolability of human consent.
The inviolability of human consent. Let's unpack that.
The analysis argues that assigning a life path to any individual, especially taking a young woman and dedicating her to a religious institution, or later forcing her into a marriage without her absolute, uncoerced consent, is a supreme violation of human dignity.
The text explicitly equates it to slavery, doesn't it?
It does. It calls it strictly haram, or unlawful. In the Quranic system, men and women hold equal, uncompromising rights to self-determination regarding their futures.
So to bypass a woman's consent is to violate the divine system itself.
You are breaking Deen.
So put yourself in Mary's shoes. She is sitting there watching these men gamble for control of her life. She is watching the blood flow in the mihrab, and she realizes this entire religious apparatus is a fraud.
It is entirely anti-human. She recognizes the systemic rot.
But recognition is one thing, right? Action is a whole different ballgame. She is one young woman against an entire entrenched, politically powerful religious establishment that is backed by the Roman Empire.
The odds are literally impossible.
So how does she find the courage to actually walk out? The traditional story insists that glowing supernatural angels literally floated down from the sky to talk to her and give her bravery.
Which is where the rationalist framework takes a sharp left turn.
Wait, hold on. If I read angels descended, my brain immediately goes to wings, halos, and divine messengers materially appearing in the room. You're telling me that this rationalist framework interprets that as entirely psychological.
Entirely.
Isn't that a massive stretch of the literal text?
You might assume that if you're only looking at post-classical theology, which heavily anthropomorphized these concepts over centuries. But Parwez's lexicographical analysis roots this in the Quranic usage of the term malaika, or angels,
Okay.
particularly when they interact with non-prophets. It introduces a psychological state called itminan-i-qalb.
Okay, let me try to wrap my head around itminan-i-qalb. It translates to profound psychological certainty, right? A steadfastness of the heart.
A total, unbreakable peace of mind. The source argues that the Quranic concept of angels descending upon believers like Mary in the temple, or even soldiers on a battlefield, is not a physical materialization of winged creatures.
So no feathers in the room.
No feathers. It represents the sudden, overwhelming itminan-i-qalb. It is the inner voice of truth, an immense psychological strength granted by the divine that fortifies an individual's psyche to stand against tyranny.
I was actually trying to think of a modern scenario for this while I was reviewing the notes, and the closest thing I could come up with is the psychology of a corporate whistleblower.
Oh, that's an interesting analogy. Let's hear it.
Imagine you work for a massive, incredibly powerful pharmaceutical company. You see the internal memos. You know for a fact they are knowingly releasing a drug that causes heart failure.
You have the proof.
You have the proof. But they have armies of lawyers. They have billions of dollars. They have the absolute power to destroy your career, bankrupt you, and ruin your life.
The fear would be paralyzing. You are entirely isolated, and the power dynamic is impossibly skewed against you.
Exactly. The terror is real. But then there is that single defining moment. Something shifts inside your brain. You look at those memos and you realize that no matter what they do to you, you cannot live with the lie anymore. You have to tell the truth.
The fear just vanishes.
Right. The terror suddenly evaporates and is replaced by this unbreakable crystalline certainty. You know they will come for you, but you don't care anymore because your moral compass has locked onto true north.
You've achieved that peace of mind.
That sudden, overwhelming influx of courage, that impenetrable psychological armor, that is what this framework is describing as the descent of angels.
I love that, and I'll actually take that analogy a step further. The text notes that God purified her. The Arabic word used is tahara.
Tahara.
Now, traditional patriarchal readings often interpret this as purification from some biological uncleanness or menstruation.
Right, bring it back to biology again.
Always. But Parwez argues it means God gave her the psychological fortitude to distance herself from the filthy, exploitative, corrupt environment of the temple. The angels, that inner voice of absolute certainty, told her not to fear, to not be sad.
They gave her the ultimate pep talk.
They assured her that if she took this monumental step to shatter those chains and reject the clergy's arbitrary rules, she would be elevated in history.
So Mary's greatness wasn't passivity. It was the ultimate act of defiance.
She walked out.
She walked out. But stepping back out into society meant she couldn't just change her address. She had to completely change how she interacted with the world. She wasn't just leaving a building. She was walking out of an entire vocabulary of oppression.
The vocabulary is key here.
Which means we have to decode the Arabic terminology. We have to look at how words that originally demanded dynamic revolutionary action got softened and neutered into passive religious definitions over centuries of mazhab.
The linguistic shift is arguably the most insidious and effective tool the priesthood used to maintain control over generations.
How so?
Well, think about it. If you change the fundamental meaning of the instructions in a text, you can completely alter the behavior of the followers without them even realizing they are being manipulated. They think they are following God, but they're actually following a neutralized version of the text.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start with a word that is ubiquitous today, tasbih.
Ah, Tasbih, a classic example.
Right. If you are listening to this and you hear the word tasbih, I guarantee you picture someone sitting quietly in a corner, eyes closed, rhythmically thumbing through a string of prayer beads, murmuring God's name over and over.
It is the ultimate image of peaceful, passive, isolated devotion.
But according to Parwez's deep dive into classical Arabic lexicons, that definition is a complete distortion of the original root, isn't it?
It's a total fabrication of later eras.
So if tasbih doesn't mean sitting quietly with prayer beads, based on what we just established about Mary's act of rebellion, I'm guessing it has to imply some kind of intense physical action.
Extreme physical action. The linguistic root of Tasbih originates from the imagery of a horse galloping at full speed.
A galloping horse.
Yes. A horse expending every single ounce of its energy with all four legs leaving the ground simultaneously.
That is the exact opposite of sitting still in a dimly lit room.
It is the absolute antithesis of passivity. Alternatively, it refers to a swimmer stretching their arms with maximum effort to swim swiftly against a strong current.
Wow. So in the divine system, in Deen, what does tasbih actually mean then?
It means to execute one's assigned duties in society, to implement the divine program with intense, relentless dynamic energy. It means striving vigorously and remaining consistently active in building a constructive, equitable society.
So when the text commands Mary to perform tasbih, it isn't telling her to go sit in a cave and meditate to heal her trauma.
No, not at all.
It is commanding her to get to work. It is telling her to expend her human capabilities for the practical betterment of her community.
She has to be the galloping horse.
And the source text pairs this with another concept that usually gets translated as patience, sabar.
Yes, sabar is another massive victim of linguistic softening. In mazhab, sabar is taught as passive endurance.
The ultimate tool of subjugation.
Exactly. If the king steals your land, have sabar. If the priests tax you into poverty, have sabar. Suffer quietly, don't complain, and God will reward you in the afterlife.
Which is incredibly convenient for the king and the priests.
Incredibly convenient, it keeps the masses docile, but in the rationalist framework, sabar means steadfastness. It means planting your feet firmly in the ground and refusing to be moved by opposition while you are actively fighting for justice.
So it's active resistance.
It is the endurance of a soldier holding the line, not the resignation of a victim accepting defeat.
That reframes everything. And the text notes that this active engagement directly attacks the institution of monasticism Mary was trapped in.
It obliterates it.
The Quran actively abolishes Rabbaniyat monastic isolation and celibacy. It frames it as an unnatural, human-engineered escape from the actual struggles of life.
The text boldly states that choosing isolated asceticism is equivalent to saying no to life. It turns human society into a graveyard.
And to counter that, the text uses this highly specific Bedouin Arabic metaphor to describe what Mary was supposed to do with her life instead of wasting it in celibacy.
Yes, the concept of qanitin.
Right. And the term used to explain this command translates conceptually to an aqsa kirbatin.
The water skin.
I absolutely love this visual. In the language of the Arab nomads, an aqsa kirbatin was a water skin that was filled to the absolute brim and then tightly, securely sealed.
Which in the desert is everything.
Water is the literal difference between life and death. You do not let it evaporate. You do not spill a single drop. You conserve it meticulously so that it can be utilized efficiently when it is needed most.
So Mary is the sealed water skin. She is overflowing with intellectual potential and God-given human capabilities.
The command is essentially saying, do not let this potential evaporate in the dry, sterile, useless environment of the temple.
Conserve your energy. Seal up your potential.
Carry it out into the harsh desert of the real world and expend it where it will actually nourish a dying society.
Which brings us to another massive linguistic redefinition, salat.
Oh boy, the big one. We hear Salat and we immediately think of the 5 daily physical prayers.
Physical rituals that, again, can easily be performed in total isolation. You can do them alone in your room.
But Parwez argues otherwise.
He argues that while the congregational aspect of Salat is important, its systemic meaning is much broader. Salat comes from a root that means to follow closely behind, like a horse running directly in the footsteps of the lead horse in a race.
So systemically, what does that look like?
Establishing Salat means establishing a society that closely follows the divine roadmap. It is the establishment of a just social order.
And this ties perfectly into how the source redefines ruku and sujud bowing and prostrating.
Right, because the visual here is usually physical yoga-like postures.
But the systemic framework argues that sujud represents complete, absolute submission to the divine law in your daily societal dealings.
Not just on a prayer mat.
Exactly. It's how you conduct your business, how you treat your employees, how you structure your economy. And ruku is the preparatory readiness to enact that submission.
And the most crucial part of the command given to Mary regarding this is the phrasing. It says, bow with those who bow.
With those who bow. It's inherently plural. It's a team sport.
It is a definitive mandate for collective societal action. The text insists that the divine system, the Deen, is communal by its very nature.
You cannot establish economic justice alone in your living room.
You cannot fight tyranny by yourself. Isolated meditation, no matter how profoundly peaceful it makes you feel, cannot replace active shoulder-to-shoulder participation in solving the socioeconomic struggles of your community.
Okay, this is a massive radical reframing. We are moving from a religion that tells you to retreat inward to find peace to a system that demands you march outward to build equity.
It's a 180-degree shift.
But this brings up a massive, glaring question that I know you, the listener, are shouting at your device right now.
I can hear them shouting from here.
Right. If the actions demanded by the Quran are so fiercely grounded in the practical, physical struggles of society, economics, politics, collective labor, then what about the supernatural stuff?
The magic.
How does this highly logical, rationalist framework deal with the literal magic in these stories? Because we need to transition from social physics to actual literal physics.
And this is where Parwez philosophy creates the most friction with traditional narratives. It introduces the foundational concept of sunnatullah.
Sunnatullah. What does that mean in this context?
It translates to the absolute, unchangeable immutability of physical laws.
So we are talking about the laws of physics, biology, chemistry, gravity.
Yes. The core philosophical argument presented in these lectures is that while God is omnipotent and created the entire universe ex nihilo out of absolute nothingness, once that universe was brought into existence, God deliberately bound creation to fixed, immutable biological and physical laws.
So basically, God wrote the source code for the universe, hit run, and now the program operates strictly by the code.
That's a great way to put it.
The code doesn't get passed or bypassed because the original programmer made a mistake or changed his mind.
Precisely. The argument is that God does not suspend his own laws. To do so would imply that the original laws were flawed, or that the universe is governed by chaotic whim rather than divine consistency.
Okay, but let's pressure test this against the actual text. Let's look at the story right before Mary even has her baby. The story focuses on her guardian, the prophet Zachariah. He is an old man, his wife is historically barren, and he prays for an heir. And suddenly his wife is pregnant with John the Baptist, or Yahya. Now, the traditional reading is extremely straightforward. Boom, magic. God suspended the laws of biology because he can do whatever he wants.
But the rationalist analysis points out that the Quran itself does not support that magical reading.
It doesn't.
No, it doesn't say God waved a wand and bypassed her reproductive system entirely. It explicitly states in another chapter referencing this exact event, وَصَلَحَ زَوْجَهُ,
Meaning?
we cured his wife's defect.
Oh, so it was a biological medical cure?
Yes. It upholds the natural law. Human reproduction strictly requires the biological union of a male and a female. The physical defect preventing that union from resulting in a pregnancy was cured, but the mechanism of reproduction remained entirely natural and biological.
That is fascinating. The text also provides a really deep psychological insight into why Zachariah wanted an heir so badly in the first place, doesn't it?
It wasn't just biology.
Right. It wasn't just this primal biological urge to pass on his DNA before he died. He was an old man carrying the massive, dangerous burden of guiding the Israelites against this incredibly corrupt, wealthy priesthood.
He was exhausted.
He looked around at his relatives and realized none of them had the moral backbone or the intellect to take over the movement. He needed an ideological heir.
An intellectual successor.
When he saw Mary's courage in the temple, when he saw her shatter the rules of Rabbaniyat, it awakened this desperate desire for a capable successor to inherit the heritage of Abraham. He wanted someone who could uphold the divine system.
Which John Yahya ultimately did. But your question about biology inevitably leads us to the ultimate pushback. I know exactly where you're going with this.
Oh, absolutely. If you were sitting here listening to this and you hear that the laws of biology are completely immutable and God never breaks them, you are immediately thinking, wait a minute, how does this framework explain Jesus?
The big question.
The Quran literally calls him Ibn Maryam, the son of Mary. Isn't that definitive, absolute textual proof that he was born miraculously without a human father? I mean, that is the bedrock of the entire story for billions of people.
It is the absolute cornerstone of the traditional narrative. But Parwez's lexicographical and historical analysis approaches this from an entirely different angle.
How so?
It argues that we are fundamentally misinterpreting an ancient Semitic cultural and linguistic convention by applying modern literalism to it.
So if calling someone the son of their mother isn't a biological statement of a virgin birth, what on earth is it?
In ancient Semitic nations, and the text notes, this convention actually persisted in many regional cultures until fairly recently. Lineage was fiercely patriarchal. You were known as the son of your father. That was the hard rule.
Right, son of John, son of David.
Exactly. However, there was a specific, well-established historical exception. If a mother possessed significantly greater fame, unparalleled historical greatness, or extraordinary societal prominence compared to the father, the offspring were respectfully and officially attributed to her name.
So it was a title of immense honor, not a medical record.
Exactly. It was a societal tribute. Now, apply this cultural lens to Mary. She was a young girl who single-handedly defied the most terrifying, oppressive, patriarchal power structure of her time.
She shattered the chains of temple monasticism.
Her ideological rebellion was so earth-shattering, so historically monumental, that her greatness vastly eclipsed whoever her husband was. Therefore, attributing Jesus to her, calling him Ibn Maryam, was a monumental, eternal tribute to her systemic struggle.
It was not a biological statement intended to nullify the existence of a human father.
No, it was entirely about honoring her.
The text actually gives a really compelling historical parallel to back this up, moving forward in time to the early Islamic Empire. It talks about the descendants of Prophet Muhammad's daughter, Fatima.
Yes, the Bani Fatima, or the children of Fatima. Historically, her descendants are famously known by her name across the Islamic world.
Now, everyone knows exactly who their father was. It was Ali, the fourth caliph. There is no biological mystery there.
None whatsoever.
But because Fatima held such an incredibly elevated status and historical greatness within the community, her specific lineage was attributed directly to her as a mark of supreme respect. Meanwhile, Ali's descendants, through his other wives, were simply called Alawi.
That perfectly illustrates the cultural convention. So the argument is that Ibn Maryam operates on that exact same principle. It honors a revolutionary woman without overriding the unchangeable laws of human reproduction.
Okay, I'm tracking with that. But what about the specific phrase God uses in the text? When Mary asks how she can have a child, God says, kun fayakun, be and it is.
Ah, the command of creation.
I'm really struggling with this one. If I hear be and it is, that sounds instantaneous. It sounds like magical materialization out of thin air. How does rationalism deal with that?
Traditional interpretation says it is instantaneous magic, but the rationalist interpretation breaks down the Arabic word amr, which translates to God's planning or divine decision-making. When God says kun be, it signifies that a finalized decision has been made in the divine realm, and it immediately enters the stage of execution.
Okay, so the decision is instantaneous, but the execution takes time.
Precisely. It initiates a gradual evolutionary process. The text uses the terms evolution and husn intizam, which means step-by-step, meticulous organization.
So it's not a poof of smoke.
Not at all. This process begins at the most microscopic foundational level and slowly develops over time, strictly adhering to those fixed biological and physical laws we just talked about. The text explicitly states this evolutionary process can sometimes span thousands of years to fully manifest in the physical world.
I think I've got a way to visualize this. Tell me if this analogy works.
Go for it.
Imagine the CEO of a massive multinational engineering corporation. They decide they're going to build the world's largest suspension bridge. The CEO slams their hand on the boardroom table and says, "Make it so."
Okay.
That order is the kun. The decision is made instantly, the authority behind it is absolute, and the gears of the corporation immediately start turning. But the bridge doesn't magically pop into existence over the river in a puff of smoke while the board is still sitting there.
No, the make it so initiates a massive logistical reality.
Right. You have to survey the land, you have to mine the iron ore, smelt the steel, weave the cables, pour the concrete. It has to be built brick by brick, rivet by rivet, strictly adhering to the immutable laws of physics, tension, and gravity.
And if the engineers ignore gravity, the bridge collapses.
Exactly. Kun fayakun is the divine make it so, but the actual construction of that reality relies on the slow, meticulous, unbreakable laws of Sunnatullah. So in this framework, Jesus was conceived and born through the unchangeable natural laws of human reproduction, set into motion by divine planning.
That is a brilliant way to frame it. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this insistence on rationalism and natural law completely reorients how we view the entire prophetic mission of Jesus.
Because his birth wasn't a magic trick.
Right. If his birth wasn't a supernatural magic trick, we have to transition our thinking from biological evolution to intellectual and societal evolution. We have to figure out what to do with his miracles.
And this is where it gets really, really complicated. Because we aren't just talking about a strange birth anymore. We're talking about making birds out of clay and breathing life into them, healing people who were blind from birth, curing lepers, and literally raising people from the dead.
The big miracles.
You can't just explain all that away with a CEO analogy.
Yeah.
How does a strictly rationalist framework handle actual zombies?
You don't explain it away, you decode it by understanding the pedagogical style of the messengers. The text argues that we must decode these miracles, the mujizat, by recognizing them as tamsilat.
Which means metaphors, allegories used for teaching.
Profound socio-intellectual metaphors. The text points out that Jesus famously spoke almost exclusively in parables and allegories to educate the masses. Let's take the clay birds, for example.
The traditional view is that he literally molded mud into a pigeon, blew on it with his mouth, and it magically grew feathers and flew away.
A literal magic trick. David Copperfield stuff.
Exactly.
But the systemic interpretation asks us to look at the political and psychological condition of the Israelites at that exact historical moment. They were living under the crushing dual oppression of the Roman Empire's military might and their own corrupt priesthood's economic extortion.
They were getting squeezed from both sides.
They had been stripped of their agency, their dignity, and their intellectual vitality. They had become stagnant, malleable, lifeless clay dolls.
They were just mud waiting to be stepped on by whoever was in charge.
Exactly. When the text says Jesus breathed into them, it argues he was breathing the energy of divine revelation wahi into this stagnant population.
Breathing life into the movement.
He was teaching them the principles of human dignity, socioeconomic justice, and systemic resistance. By doing so, he transformed them from lifeless lumps of clay into dynamic, energized individuals capable of soaring to new intellectual and societal heights. They became birds.
That is infinitely more powerful than a magic trick.
It really is.
And it applies perfectly to the medical miracles, too. Healing the blind and the leprous. The text uses specific Arabic terms here, doesn't it? Akma for blind and Abras for leprous.
And again, it asserts these are not biological diseases in this context. To heal the akma is to cure intellectual blindness, to open the eyes of those who cannot see the systemic exploitation happening right in front of them.
Waking people up to the reality of their oppression.
Yes. And to cure the Abras, the leprous, refers to those who have been stripped of the freshness of life by destructive, paralyzing dogmas. Their society had decayed them, made them untouchable. Jesus' ideology restored their vitality and reintegrated them into a healthy community.
Which naturally leads to the ultimate miracle, raising the dead. If you follow the logic we just laid out, this isn't a zombie scenario where corpses are clawing out of graves.
No, it represents breathing revolutionary energy into an ideologically dead nation. It is the revival of a civilization that had completely flatlined under the weight of mazhab.
I really want you, the listener, to pause and think about this for a second. Think about how taking these metaphors literally actually robs them of their power.
It trivializes them.
It totally does. If Jesus just performs a biological magic trick and heals one guy's physical blindness, that's great for that one guy. But the corrupt priesthood is still in power. The Romans are still taxing people into starvation. The exploitative system is still completely broken.
A magic trick doesn't threaten an empire.
Exactly. A magic trick doesn't threaten an empire. But a systemic revolution, waking up an entire population of lifeless clay dolls, curing their intellectual blindness, and teaching them how to see the truth and soar against their oppressors. That heals an entire civilization.
And that is something an empire will crucify you for.
Which brings us to the core of what that revolution actually entailed. What was the actual goal of breathing life into this dead society? Because waking up a society intellectually is only step one.
Step 2 is the economy.
Right. Once people realize they are oppressed, the very first thing they look at is who holds the purse strings. And that takes us directly into how this movement threatened the elite's bank accounts.
Let's follow the money. We are moving from intellectual revival straight into the economic engine of the divine system.
The transition from mazhab to deen is not just about changing what you think in your head. It is fundamentally about changing how resources are distributed in your streets.
The text notes that the primary function of a messenger is to dismantle human-engineered religion. And how did the priests maintain their monopoly? By acting as the gatekeepers of the economy and human behavior.
By arbitrary legislation. They decided what was halal, meaning lawful, and what was haram, unlawful.
Yes. Jesus declared that his mission was to make halal the many things the self-appointed priesthood had arbitrarily made haram.
They were just making rules up to stay in power.
Exactly. They used these prohibitions to stifle human potential, create artificial scarcity, and extract wealth through fines and mandatory sacrifices. He came to restore the concept that only God holds legislative authority, stripping the priests of their power to make laws.
But he didn't stop at theology. He went straight after their hoarded wealth.
He did.
This is genuinely my favorite part of the source text because it frames one of Jesus' miracles as a direct, anti-capitalist audit of the ruling class. The text says he revealed hidden wealth.
A very dangerous thing to do.
He publicly exposed the food and the wealth that the elites and the priests were secretly hoarding in their massive homes while the masses starved in the streets.
He was exposing the hypocrisy and the exploitation inherent in their capitalist system. And he didn't just expose the problem and complain about it, he brought the structural solution. The text calls this solution Nizam-e-Rubaiyat.
Nizam-e-Rubaiyat, the system of providence. Okay, I want to understand the actual mechanics of this. How does Nizam-e-Rubaiyat actually function in practice?
Nizam-e-Rubaiyat is defined as a comprehensive economic structure where the basic means of sustenance, food, shelter, security are absolutely guaranteed to every single member of society by the markaz or the central authority.
Guaranteed. Not earned through grueling labor, but guaranteed.
It is a system built entirely on the continuous circulation of wealth, not the accumulation of it. Wealth must flow like blood in a healthy body to nourish every single cell in the community. If it pools or clots in the private homes of a few elites, the body dies.
The text ties this directly to the concept of the straight path. Usually, if you ask someone what the straight path, Surat Mustaqim is, they give you a moral checklist.
Don't lie, don't cheat, say your prayers.
Right, be nice to your mom. But the text defines the ultimate practical objective of the straight path as ensuring that absolutely no human being is forced into subservience to another human just to get their daily bread.
Because economic dependence is the root of all subjugation. If I control your access to food and shelter, I control your compliance. I own you.
It's leverage.
By having a central authority guarantee basic sustenance through the equitable circulation of resources, the divine system frees humanity to bow only to God's law, not to the whims of a wealthy employer, a tyrannical landlord, or a corrupt priest.
If you're listening to this right now on your commute to a job you hate just to pay rent, or you're stressing over a grocery bill, this concept of the system of providence should hit incredibly close to home.
It's remarkably relevant.
But I can hear someone playing devil's advocate right now. Why is God so obsessed with economics? Isn't religion supposed to be about the soul? This brings us to a concept the source text calls the law of requital. It is basically social physics.
It is the idea that the Quran treats social and economic conduct like a hard, unforgiving science. The law of requital dictates that a society's survival is inextricably, unavoidably tied to its economic justice.
So it isn't about God sitting on a cloud getting emotionally angry and striking a city with a lightning bolt because they sinned.
No, it's cause and effect. It's gravity.
Exactly. Rampant hoarding, vast wealth inequality, and oppressive cultural customs aren't just moral failings that get you a demerit in heaven. They are systemic, structural stress fractures in the foundation of your civilization.
The text gives a highly relevant example of oppressive cultural customs that paralyze resources.
Ah.
Extravagant weddings and funerals.
Oh, this is so painfully relevant today. You go into massive debt to throw a $50,000 wedding to impress extended family members you don't even like, just because the culture, the modern mazhab, demands it.
Yes. The text views these not as religious duties or joyful celebrations, but as self-imposed economic chains.
This burning money.
They place severe economic and psychological burdens on individuals, locking up capital and preventing that wealth from being circulated usefully within the community. Instead of using that money to build hospitals or schools or guarantee sustenance, it's wasted.
And the law of requital says, what about that? It says that if a society continues to hoard wealth at the top and burn precious resources on wasteful, ego-driven traditions, while the bottom tier of society starves, it will scientifically inevitably collapse. It is as unavoidable as dropping an apple and watching it hit the floor.
So we have covered an immense amount of ground today, and we've completely shattered the traditional narrative. Let's try to synthesize this massive paradigm shift for the listener.
We started with a story that most people read as a passive magical fairy tale.
We really did. We started with a quiet virgin, a baby born without a father, and literal flying clay pigeons. And using the rationalist framework of Allama G. Parwez, we've transformed that fairy tale into a hardcore civilizational blueprint.
It's an entirely different text now.
We have a revolutionary woman, Maryam, who possessed the psychological certainty, the itmanani qualb, to walk out of the slaughterhouse and shatter the chains of a corrupt, exploitative priesthood. We have a leader, Jesus, born of natural laws and honored with his mother's name, who used profound metaphorical education to wake up a stagnant society and establish a radically equitable economic system.
And in doing so, this text establishes 3 permanent values that we can take away. First, the absolute consistency of physical laws, or sunatullah. God does not cheat his own code.
Second, the inviolability of human consent. No one can be forced into a life path or treated as an asset.
And third, the absolute necessity of economic justice through the system of providence, where wealth circulates to guarantee freedom from subjugation.
But this leaves us hanging on the edge of a massive, glaring, practical dilemma. If the divine system mandates that wealth must circulate, and that absolutely no one should have to bow to another human being for their daily bread, how exactly does a society transition its infrastructure from a hoarding capitalist model to this system of providence without collapsing into total chaos?
It is the ultimate logistical question of revolution.
Right. How does the markaz, the central authority of this system, actually enforce this distribution of wealth without just becoming another oppressive priesthood dictating arbitrary rules? How do you mandate that kind of systemic charity without making it feel like a tyrannical tax?
That is the exact question that bridges us into the next lecture in this series. It is a puzzle we are going to have to tackle next time.
We definitely will. It's going to be a deep dive of its own.
It requires a delicate, highly structured balance between individual freedom and collective responsibility. But until then, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to mull over. We've talked a lot about the Israelites and their ancient temple today, but look at your own daily life.
Look at the systems you participate in.
Think about the cultural traditions you blindly participate in, the extravagant weddings you attend, the societal definitions of success that demand you hoard wealth, the rituals you perform without ever asking why. Are you truly executing your duties with the galloping, relentless energy of Tasbih to build a better, more equitable system?
Or are you, right now, just a lifeless clay doll, sitting quietly in the dark, waiting for a magical miracle to save you?
Are you reading these texts for blessings, or are you reading them for a revolution? Think about it.